Hey everyone, I'm Gal and this is Marco, and we are just about in time to start our webinar. Let me pull our slides. Today we are going to talk about portable trust and the age of sharing, which I guess everyone is aware of what that is in the time that we are today. Everything is digital, and that means that all those digital assets that we can access should also be shareable, the same as we used to do when it wasn't everything so much digital. Of course, we now have a bit of AI in the mix, and that's what we would like to talk about today. We want to talk with you about the evolving CIAM and how CIAM should be ready for the advanced digital business, which eventually includes a lot of sharing. So, in order to talk about this very interesting topic, I have invited Marco from Thales.
Well, thank you very much, Gal, and thanks for joining today. Marco Venuti at Thales indeed. And again, like Gal, I have the privilege of having conversations with customers of any vertical, of many countries. So what you're about to assist today is the joint experience or derived knowledge out of real life cases on many different interaction over the last few years.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah, well, hopefully, or at least a good usage of your time and attention. Before going into the subject of the day, we thought it would have been interesting for those of you who are not going to be in Vegas next week to have a bit of what is going to happen in Vegas. That is, as usual, stay in Vegas. Again, in next week, there will be the Identiverse conference, which is along with the European Identity Conference that was running 2 weeks ago in Berlin, the most relevant event in the industry. Every year, of course, a few things change as the evolution of the market dictates. What you find in this slide is a cross-cut count of which session, how many sessions are talking of the core subjects that defines the identity as we know it today. Why is that relevant? Because again, as year pass, there is a bit of reshuffle of what matters or what more or less. We can see very clearly that this year is dominated by the notion of IT security and ITDR, which is a bit of or worth noticing because a few years ago, for those of you which are identity practitioners, have had the chance to address identity internal experience in your organization, we went through phases. We had the governance phases dominated by compliance needs. We had the frictionless CIAM phase. Of course, now we have a very high level of attention on agentic AI and securization, which reverberates into two main domains. One is security per se. The main implication is how do I reduce the blast radius if I don't do a good job in securing AI, which in turn mean how do I manage properly the authorization that entails. And this is behind why authorization is now in the top 6 list, while a few years ago was well a bit lower in the chain. Again, if you're going to be in Vegas, this is what dominates the time there. If you're going to be in Vegas, you don't need to join the session that Gal and I will have the pleasure to deliver because it will be very similar to this one. Okay, but so that's your opportunity to catch up on what is our experience. Having said that, we already spoke enough about us. This session today is not about us. It's about the user, it's about the customer, it's about what the notion of customer interaction among customer became, which is indeed not a single entity, but rather a multitude, is an ecosystem of entities, which are, as Gal represented very nicely at the opening, expecting different level of services or given as part of their expectation, the ability to share, to have in common selected capabilities or selected access to selected resources, which varies depending on from playlist to bank account, and another multitude of examples are possible. So this is indeed spanning not only users, or at least not only humans, but is a broader notion of entity involved. We tend to distinguish the word these days in non-human identity and human. Again, non-human includes, of course, the agents, for obvious reason. This is very intuitive, which are one of the actors in display today. We call it Jackie, the AI assistant for the bank, but even the companies, the bank itself, and the advisory firm is a non-human identity to be managed, okay, which is maybe less of an intuitive notion, very often overlooked, but also demanding for an identity, also part of a broader set of relationship. In this case, Rosa is an advisor belonging to an advisory firm, which is in turn in a relationship with the bank. Of course, we are more familiar and it's more intuitive the fact that there is Emily, a mother with a child with some degrees of delegation that is part of what she is expecting to be able to manage. But maybe we go to a bit more detail around what they are, their expectation with the next slide for you, Gal.
Sure. So, Marco, you basically presented our actors, I would say, the Chen family. And what we would like to do, we thought of how to really share the importance of those use cases with you. And initially, we built all kinds of technical slides, but eventually, technology is there to support real life examples. And that's why we brought the Chen family, which Marco just presented them in a couple of slides. And what I would like to do is to share with you what are their expectations, what they actually need to, what support they are expecting and what they need to happen in order to work efficiently in the digital space. Because eventually, as we move forward with the time, we work more in the digital space. We work more with the interfaces, the digital interfaces of our bank, of our even grocery store, whatever, right? And then we have expectations that whatever we work with, whatever application we interact with, does not consider just us as an individual, but also will be able to see the ecosystem which we operate in and consider that as well. So, for example, we have Emily. And Emily, she owns the family. She owns a bank account. She has a spouse. She has children, and she wants them to be part of her ecosystem, part of the relationship that is to be considered. It needs to be considered when she opens a bank account, when she opens an investment portfolio with that third party financial advisor of the bank. She wants to delegate some of the capabilities either to the third-party advisor and maybe some of those also to her family, whether children or spouse, because she is operating in an ecosystem that needs to be considered. And therefore, she expects the bank not to see her just as an individual, but also to see the relationship which is around her. And it's not just Emily who's accessing and someone else is accessing the bank account or any parts of that bank account. It's one ecosystem that needs to operate together. We don't want the decisions that are being made or the actions that are being made in the bank to be separated. Rather, we want them to be one of a whole so they can be more accurate. Okay, so this is Emily. Now let's have a look on her son, Liam. Liam is her son, and he's 14 already, so he gets access to the bank account because he has all kinds of things he wants to spend money on. My child, for example, she likes to spend a lot in all those online games, so she needs to have some limits there. Maybe I'm not working as well as Emily, because Emily actually, she placed some limitation on what Liam can spend. If Liam gets an allowance, a weekly allowance, he can work within that scope. But what happens if he wants to spend more? Should he be able automatically to spend more? Obviously, he wants that, but that's Emily's money, so she needs to control that, right? So he cannot transmit money to other parties, first of all, that are not known, or is not within the limit that Emily has already set from the beginning. So Liam has his own access to a portion of the bank account. His card, his debit card, is linked to a sub account of Emily, but Emily still has full control. And she that way she gives Liam the option to operate within the boundaries she set, but when he wants to extend those boundaries, she can either agree or decline. Additionally, because Liam, he's 14, it's easy for him to work not just with the mobile application. The way they all operate today is with a chat assistant. And Liam wants to do that through the chat. He wants to work in the way he's more accustomed to. And therefore, all those capabilities I just mentioned, they need to be available in all the paths of operation Liam actually wants to operate in. Let's look at another relationship. The other relationship is Rosa. Now, Rosa, she works for that financial firm that Emily has signed up to. Emily, as part of opening the bank account, she has also subscribed to financial consulting via a third-party firm. And Rosa is working for that firm. And Rosa was assigned to be the advisor for Emily and a family. So there is a connection between the bank and the financial firm, financial advisory firm. And additionally, now there is a connection between Emily and Rosa. And by that also by Rosa, between Rosa and Liam. And what Rosa can now do, she can advise. She can't carry operation just by herself. She can advise where to invest money. She can advise what to do with that money, but obviously she can't do the operations just by herself. So she would view the current status. She would recommend, she would prepare whatever needs to be prepared, but she would not move money by herself. Okay? And our last family member, I would say, or the last person, or no, sorry, not person, the last assistant we need to consider here is the bank assistant. So that is new, of course, but that's how things tend to operate today, with an assistant that can help make the process much more efficient. And this assistant needs access to the bank account of Emily, also to the account of Liam. He needs to be able to support Emily and Liam and even Rosa in order to do whatever they want to do, but it needs to be very much contained to only their set of approved capabilities. Obviously, this assistant also serves a large amount of customers, right? So it can do much more. But in the context of helping Emily, helping Liam, and Rosa do whatever they need, that's what it needs to do. It needs to suggest, it needs to help them carry out whatever they need within the scopes of that bank account. But it also needs approval. It needs approval whenever more risky operations are being made. So we are now introduced all of those family members and actors that operate around Emily. And that actually creates a full relationship map. A full relationship map that what we are doing here today, both Marco and myself, we are telling you CIAM needs to be aware of. CIAM needs to be considered of that relationship map. If up until now CIAM was primarily focused on the single consumer and the consumer consent to operate within its own space, that is no longer enough. Today, any single customer, any single consumer has a set of relationship that comes with him. And SIAM, and that's the new SIAM, needs to be able to acknowledge that and also act according to that relationship map. And we saw that with Emily. Emily has a family. She delegates access to her family. Emily has a relationship with the financial advisor. She needs to delegate some capabilities to the financial advisor and so on. Also to the chat and all those elements we presented.
Yeah,
Yes, Mark.
and that's where we maybe can start indeed explaining a bit better what is the dualism of SIAM as we traditionally know him for what it does, opposed to what is required to fuel and to support a delegation model that spanned by the relationship that Gal illustrated. Again, SIAM is indeed about onboarding and establishing the trust and gathering the information related to who is whom as a single person, but also in the context of the broader ecosystem. So, of course, starting from the example we just had, is about onboarding and verifying that Emily is a human being and is actually Emily, capturing her consent and her preferences, depending on the nature of the service she will be given access to, and enriching the collection of attributes that will be later instrumental to appropriately authorize their action, including the ability for her to extend the relationship bound to her to family member, which might in turn spin additional onboarding of additional users, such as Liam in our example. Again, this entire list of action are what SIAM is there for, is to establish the trust, establish what we know about the various entity and the way they interact with one another. For doing what? Of course, to fuel what is the service and the nature of the capabilities that the user is now entitled to leverage from our organization, including the ability to delegate some of them within the boundaries of what the policy there define are allowing for. We Today we intentionally pick a financial banking related case. Is just an example that we all can relate to. We all have a bank account. We all have family members, or that might be the destination of a delegation. But by all means, everything we are saying here is applicable in retail, is applicable in insurance, is applicable in manufacturing, is applicable in many other domains, probably most of them, with different names naming in the way we call the action that are delegated. But there are a lot of similarity in the notion of delegation. Though delegation itself is a bit of an overloaded term, so we thought it would have been a good idea to at least clarify a bit. That is indeed a single word, delegation, but it means different things in different contexts. There are three flavors of delegation. There is personal delegation, which is maybe what we are mostly familiar with. There are different names, such as sharing, such as power of attorney, okay, which is also a very popular word to define that, a bit more formal, is what indeed is involved in our example in a financial advisor relationship or in emergency proxy access in many sensitive action, depending on the nature of the service. So personal delegation is, of course, user to user, is among users. Is a many-to-many among users. Different notion is the company delegation, which is across organization, or when an organization is delegating a user, a delegated manager for operate on behalf of organization. This is very much what is appropriately modeled in a B2B context. In this case that we just saw is the advisory firm, which has a delegated manager, somebody that manages the users, including maybe even Rosa, which is an employee of the advisory firm, right? But in this case, it's the bank that has a relationship with an advisory firm, and the advisory firm is in turn a relationship with a delegated manager within that organization. That's company delegation. And then there is, of course, agentic delegation, which is another form, again, of delegation with a different flavor of the nature of the party involved. Is human to agent. Okay, a human is delivering an intent or asking an agent to do something, and the agent in turn is spinning multiple agents, so sub-delegating, subtask to brothers, agents, right? So this has different boundaries in terms of what need to be authorized. And again, is by all means very different from the previous two because it's kind of a mix in terms of degree of authorization and paradigm there involved. Now, that is just a way to disambiguate or taxonomize a bit what delegation means. And talking specifically of agentic, we can maybe drill down a bit on what it takes in the context of human to agent delegation, an example where the authorization infusion demonstrate what that involves.
So let's look at a few scenarios and how delegation actually works, and not only how it works, also what controls are needed. So one very common use case is when Liam is using that AI assistant to send $75 to Alex. Now, Liam's budget is only $60, all right? So let's understand how this process would actually go. So first of all, Liam is working with the assistant, and the assistant, the AI assistant, first of all, need to acknowledge who is Liam. Does he know Liam? So in this case, the answer would be yes, because Liam has already registered by his mother approval to the agentic assistant capabilities of the bank, and therefore it means the AI assistant knows Liam. So we are good with that. And Liam was, of course, authenticated using biometrics. So moving forward. Second, who is operating here? Liam is operating on whose behalf? Because eventually Liam is asking to transfer money from a specific bank account, and this is a delegated account. Is that approved? So we know yes, because we saw beforehand, Emily has actually delegated the account, the sub account, to Liam. So we are also good there. Moving forward, to whom the money is being transferred. Now, that's new because Liam is trying to transfer money to Alex. The assistant is unfamiliar with Alex. The bank is also unfamiliar with Alex. So the assistant would recognize this is a first-time person that we are asking to send money to. Wait, let's put some controls there. Additionally, the amount itself, $75, exceeds the amount Liam is approved for. Again, let's stop, wait, and maybe we need approval. And for both operations, because this is a new payee, and because the amount exceeds the approved amount, the assistant would send a notification to Emily, the parent, to get approval. Now, because Liam would probably spoke with his mother beforehand, and she knows she needs to expect that, she approved, so we're all good. But you can see how the flow went all the way from knowing who the identity is, where that identity is operating, what the identity Liam is trying to do, both the amount, the action, and the the payee itself. And because all of those elements were considered in the process, the agent knew to raise a hand and say, stop, I need additional approval. And he got the approval. So we are good. Let's look at another flow. In this case, Emily wants to invest money. She works hard, she has a nice salary, so she wants to invest. And she's not an expert, right? Because she's not an expert, she is working with Rosa. Rosa is an employee of the financial organization that is approved to work with the bank in order to provide financial advices. So Rosa has looked at Emily's financials. She has looked at her current portfolio. She has also evaluated her goals, and she created recommendations. She actually did the best she can do with Emily's information, combined with the knowledge she has, in order to suggest actions on how to invest the money. And she actually sends that recommendation to Emily. She's not doing that just by herself. She's not operating because she cannot, right? She can't transfer money. She can't change any of the beneficiaries. She can't even move the money to other families of Emily's from Emily's family, but she can make recommendations. And that's exactly what she is doing. She's sending recommendations to Emily. And Emily, all she needs to do, review and approve or decline, whatever she prefers. And that's how it goes. That's exactly how it goes. Emily has given Rosa a partial access to her bank account, delegated access. Rosa has operated within that scope to create recommendations, but the actual approval still remains within Emily. And that leads us to the delegation gap, because what we are basically sharing with you here is today, it's not just about a B2B use case or even a B2B2C use case. We are now calling out the business to business, business to consumer, consumer to agentic use cases. There is therefore a delegation gap. If we are considering what CIAM needs to handle today, it needs to understand those relationships. It needs to understand the relationship between one user to another family member. It needs to understand the relationship between one organization to another, bank and a financial advisory firm, between a human and an agent, that would be either Emily or Liam with the agentic assistant. It needs to understand all of that and to answer questions. And today we just listed out some samples of what CIAM can actually answer and what it would find more challenging to answer. So obviously CIAM is very much designed to answer who is that user. And if they have authenticated, CIAM excels in those capacities. And if they have any profile attributes or consents and so on, that's all on the current traditional CIAM. But now CIAM needs to evolve. It needs also to understand per user if they are acting for themselves or on behalf. It needs to understand how to manage delegated access. It needs to also understand per transaction if it is approved now. Not only if Liam can transfer money, but if Liam can transfer this amount to this pay now, right? The actor itself, it's not just a user. It can be a user, or it can be a delegated user, such as a partner or an AI agent. Approval sometimes is needed for more high-risk operations. And eventually, it all comes down to why things are happening now And do we approve what's happening now based on the overall context? And that is the delegation gap. And that is where CIAM needs to evolve. And Marco,
Yep.
it's up to you to explain how.
Talking of which, of course, I spent the last few years in SIAM, so I feel entitled to maybe comment a bit on that. So the traditional definition of SIAM is captured for the purpose of this conversation today in a very high-level fashion in this slide. So we see on the left-hand side a representation of the main entity involved in the play we are discussing here. There is an organization, in this case a bank, with customers, which are reached directly, but also through intermediaries, partner, and customer, of course, might in turn have relationship with other customers. So Cyan was designed with B2C in mind, with the frictionless, with the onboarding, the user journey, the consent, the preferences. And in coarse grain, the definition of capability there included can be enumerated as managing onboarding of users, providing different form of authentication depending on the level of assurance required, managing authorization, which is in its original form CIAM related, coarse grain and static in nature, and of course some degrees of self-service, and self-service are traditionally change my user attribute, change my consent and preferences. So CIAM was starting along that angle of capabilities, which though evolved, and starting from CIAM as an acronym, the new definition of what CIAM is now meant to be addressing, CIAM acronym doesn't fit any longer. If you were to be precise in the enumeration of the entity involved, it would be B2B to C to AI. I don't even try to pronounce that. Okay, I think you got the impression that is a different word, is a different degree of entity which are involved in a chain of implication that also materialize in a different set of capability involved. Color coded here in blue. So starting from the onboarding is no longer user onboarding. There are multiple entities that need to be onboarded. Again, in the B2B side of the acronym, there are organization onboarding. We spoke of banking, which maybe doesn't pose that challenge. In other domain, in other vertical, there is indeed a lot of variation of what organization onboarding entails. So yes, there is a notion of orchestration applicable not to the user journey, but to the organization onboarding journey, also applicable here. Authentication is maybe the least impacted. Authentication in many ways is a solved problem. Go Passkey if you're not on Passkey already, if you're a human. If you're an agent, there are different acronyms and different things. We don't go there today. But again, is maybe more already well established and addressed. I'm not saying that is a solved problem. The complexity in the change management and making it happen, but from a technology standpoint, is a solved problem. The answer is Passkey, full stop. When we go to authorization, things change. The coarse grain static approach that originally SIAM came along with, this is maybe the most impacted side of this entire conversation. That is no longer what is meeting the requirement of this long chain of entity B to B to C to A, and the all intertwined relationship that link them up that Gal explained a few slides ago. So the authorization is fine grain, is not about the action, is about the payload, is about what data are impacted, is about the context, okay, in which this is happening. So is 2 order of magnitude more enhanced compared to the static approach, coarse grain, where it originates from, to fuel what? To fuel what we call delegation. Delegation is the tip of the iceberg. Delegation is what the user experience can be rendered in a dedicated application to manage who can do what, can be embroiled and infused in the banking application in our example, can be again a standalone delegation capability, can be an embroiled in the business application notion of delegation. But this is again only the skin. The real engine is indeed the authorization subsystem that manage that complexity. Okay. Which brings maybe Gal back to you to what is that authorization engine like?
Yeah, and I know this is a bit of a loaded slide, but you need all those capabilities to achieve what we just spoke of. So obviously, it all starts with the um, CIAM solution that typically today would include an orchestration layer that would support the onboarding and verification process, relationship onboarding, obviously all authentication, step up, and consent management, capturing the consent, and so on. Profile management, and today you would also see those solutions starting to support the agent registration and binding it to the identity itself, to the user itself. But we spoke of the gap, and the gap is eventually how do you take all those identities all the way to what they want to do? And on the right side of the slide, you can see the various applications they would use, which are mobile applications, advisor portal, bank assistant, and so on. There are many, right? So in order to take all those identities from where they are to efficiently operating within the different access points to the bank or to any other digital interface, right, that needs to support those relationships, that's exactly where authorization comes in, because authorization can, one, look at all those different attributes. We call them attributes. A consent is an attribute. The way a user is defined is an attribute. Relationship between mother and son, or between one bank account to financial advisor, those are all considered attributes. So we are looking at all those attributes and we are defining the relationship between policies. Policies, very, very briefly, is a way to capture relationship. It's a way to say that if a primary owner of a bank account has agreed to delegate to another person, then the relationship, that's the relationship that would enable that type of access with those set of operations. Now, the policy management is the layer where you define the relationship between what I just mentioned, and then there is the policy decision point that is responsible for making decisions in runtime. Very brief to a lot of technology. We are, by the way, happy to discuss with you at any point of time how this actually is represented in our products. But let's move forward. We are near the end of this webinar and we want to leave you with some key takeaways. So first of all, let's start with what a future-ready CIAM looks like. So first of all, authorization first mindset. That's important. That's why we are here. We are basically saying CIAM alone is not sufficient. It is required to support more advanced use cases, specifically around delegation and the relationship the consumers, the customers themselves have. And therefore, in order to handle that in an efficient way, authorization is needed. So you need to think about both your customers, consumers, and authorization together. And just think of where that would get you. And second, policies. Now, not just policies by themselves, which can be a very technical term, but also reusable, portable policies. Because remember where we mentioned just some examples where those policies need to operate. You don't really want different policies for your AI agent or for the mobile application or for the web portal. Eventually, they all need to capture the same business logic. Implementation can be different. Implementation can be in different technologies, and that's absolutely fine. But the representation of those policies, the business logic, needs to be consistent and the same across all of those channels, right? Because your users, they should have the same experience.
Yeah,
Marco.
absolutely. And that nicely link with the box underneath, which is governance by design, which is the observability and to make things understandable and explainable. Of course, a common lingo, a common approach in representing policy across the board is instrumental to grant that degree of visibility. Expanding on the notion of governance, of course, that means that should by definition be implementing, and this is intrinsic, a least privilege or zero trust approach, and, as mentioned before, be interoperable and, by definition, when it comes to governance, auditable and transparent in what happened, when, and why. The final box, just to complete the picture, is built-in multi-tenancy. Is about relationship among entities. Some are human, and again, they are in a circle of direct relationships. Some are not, back to the organization. So there is an intrinsic notion of multi-tenancy, which is because there is a multitude of organization involved. There is a multitude of cluster of relationship involved, such as families, okay? Inevitably, there is a multi-tenancy degree of complexity that need to be addressed, okay? Which means also to slice and dice the visibility on which relationship belongs to what, to make it modelable, to make it approachable, and also to make it capture as part of the delegation rules to be implemented. We get then to, I think, the final slide,
Yeah.
right? So let me take bullet number 1. As I come from the CIAM side, CIAM is evolving, okay? So what we have been knowing for CIAM has evolved. So I wouldn't like to leave you with the impression that CIAM need to improve because CIAM lag behind. No, CIAM has changed. There is a lot to say around how things have changed. And I mentioned before the nature of what the onboarding of different entities, like the human in the loop in different contexts, the organization onboarding, and different degrees of additional services that user need to be provided with, and the multitude of form of authentication. But the way it managed trust and sharing and delegation has changed, and that's where the evolution is happening, and that's what we hope we transferred with this conversation today.
Mhm.
Okay?
And the second key takeaway is, look, there's a new pattern here, B2B, to C, to AI. So multiple players. We are just saying you need to consider not just the one user, sorry, the one actor, but the relationship as well. Because any single user would need those relationships to be considered. And the last one here is advanced authorization, which we believe is a crucial component of any future CIAM architecture.
And with that, as we started with Vegas, we close with Vegas. If any of you happen to be in Vegas next week at Identiverse, it would be our pleasure to see you at our joint reception on Tuesday evening. Okay. Maybe we talk of other subject. I think you had enough around CIAM and authorization for today, but if you appreciate to further elaborate, that's the perfect opportunity again to share a drink and to share more around this subject, which is very much part of our passion and our professional experience. With that,
With
Thales,
that, I
maybe
think, yeah, we are at time. We don't even have time for all
yes.
the questions. So we will send you via email the answers to the questions. But I think, just one last question, which is important to address. How do PlainID and Thales complement each other in this story? Because we are presenting together. And I will start by saying that eventually authorization and authentication, they need to work together, and this is really a classical flow. CIAM starts the user journey, authorization completes it. Now PlainID and Thales have acknowledged that, and therefore we have been working for quite some time on a partnership module in order to be able to provide you with a complete end-to-end solution. And we just today announced that this partnership, which we are also going to celebrate at Identiverse. So feel free to speak with us to learn more.
Thank you very much for joining and hope to see you in Vegas or on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you.